I want to kind of set the predicate here in terms of those kind words that Judge Carter just said about me. I've been in the Congress 26 years. I've been on the Energy and Commerce Committee 24 years. I have been a congressional observer or delegate at large to all the major global warming climate change conferences called COPs, Council of Parties. I was at Kyoto when Vice President Gore came over and made his famous speech, and then on behalf of President Clinton agreed to sign the Kyoto Accord, which the U.S. Senate never took up. Most recently, I was a part of the congressional delegation that then Speaker Nancy Pelosi took to Copenhagen last year, where President Obama came and pleaded that there be a conference agreement, which then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton agreed to fund with with dollars that the United States government didn't have. So I was at Buenos Aires. I mean, I've been all the major conferences as a congressional observer or delegate. I've chaired dozens of hearings on global warming, authored bills, was an original co-sponsor, and passed the helped vote for and support the Clean Air Act amendments in 1990. So I've been involved in this issue for a number of years. Let me say this: CO2 is not a pollutant under the criteria as put forward by the Clean Air Act. It's not one of the named criteria pollutants like SO2 or ozone. It is necessary for life as we know it. The term greenhouse gas, if you just think what a greenhouse is, self-enclosed, in this case the world, and the greenhouse gases are what create the atmosphere and help trap the heat so that life can exist. CO2 is a trace gas. It's about 0.1% of the atmosphere. Man-made CO2, called anthropogenic CO2, is, I don't know the exact percentage of the total, but it is it is less than 50%. So what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years is this theory of global warming and climate change needed a bogeyman, and they chose CO2, and they have developed these models that show as CO2 levels rise in the atmosphere over time, the temperature rises. It is a fact that CO2 is rising, but it is not necessarily a fact that that rise is causing temperature to rise. In fact, there's quite a bit of data that would indicate that CO2 rises as a consequence of temperature rising, not so it is a follower, not a leader in that. So in any event, this administration, the Obama administration, when they came into office in January of 2009, began a process or accelerated a process to determine that CO2 was a danger to the atmosphere, a danger to the health of the U.S. population. And they, within 90 days, issued an endangerment finding where they said that since CO2 was a danger to public health, they had the right to regulate CO2, and they began to promulgate these proposed regulations. So in any event, this administration, the Obama administration, when they came into office in January of 2009, began a process or accelerated a process to determine that CO2 was a danger to the atmosphere, a danger to the health of the U.S. population. And they, within 90 days, issued an endangerment finding where they said that since CO2 was a danger to public health, they had the right to regulate CO2, and they begin to promulgate these proposed regulations. Now, what does that have to do with the special order this evening? The Environmental Protections Agency has made a decision, and I think a political decision, to be punitive towards Texas, and has gone down, and I'm sure Judge Carter and Judge Gohmert have pointed out that they've revoked over 100 existing air quality permits, some of which that have been on the books since the 1990s, for sites and facilities in Texas. Those permits are for more than CO2. They actually are required by the Clean Air Act to regulate SO2 and NOx and ozone, things of this sort. They've revoked all of those. They have also, the EPA, has also issued, I don't know the right word, Judge, threats, warnings to the state of Texas that Texas must begin to implement some of these proposed regulations on CO2. And in both cases, I think the EPA is acting without the law being on their side. And in the case of the CO2 regulations, I'm very confident they're acting without the science on their side. So what those of us that represent Texas here in the Congress, in conjunction with our governor, lieutenant governor, the Texas House, the Texas Senate, and the Attorney General of Texas are saying is, before we go any further, let's see what the real facts are. Let's see, has Texas, as a regulatory entity through the Texas Council of Environmental Quality, TCEQ, failed in its obligation under the Clean Air Act to implement the terms of that act? I think the answer is Texas has not failed. I think the answer is, if you look at the record, air quality and the criteria pollutants that are specifically regulated by the Clean Air Act is improving in Texas. We have 2 or 3 or 4, I guess. We have the DFW is a non-attainment area, El Paso is a non-attainment area, Houston, Harris County is a non-attainment area, and Beaumont, Port Arthur, I believe, are still listed as a non. So we have 4 areas that have been in non-attainment under the specific criteria of the Clean Air Act. In all 4 of those, the state of Texas has submitted what are called state implementation plans, SIPs, and those have been accepted with one, I think with one exception, by the EPA regionally and nationally. And under those SIPs, air quality is improving. And if the EPA were not to keep changing the standard, we would be in attainment in all 4 regions. But each time we've gotten close in the DFW area, for example, to being in attainment, they have tightened or changed the standard and said that we're in non-compliance. So what we're doing this evening under Judge Carter and Judge Gohmert's leadership is saying, let's begin to have a debate about what the facts are. The first fact that everybody watching this and listening on the floor needs to know is air quality in Texas is improving. The TCEQ, Texas legislature, has done an outstanding job of implementing the terms and conditions which we have passed here in Washington. Number 2, the state of Texas, working with industry, has adopted a flexible permitting program where we work with industry and say, here's the standards you need to meet, here are the various ways you can meet it, let's work together. And that's worked very well. Compliance costs in Texas are below the national average. Industry sees that. Industry is coming to Texas. People are moving to Texas for its quality of life. And I'm sure y'all pointed out that Texas has led the nation in job creation. Texas has led the nation in, or one of the leading states in terms of population increase. Now, you cannot be doing all those good things and then be derelict in air quality if in fact air quality is improving and water quality is improving. So we want a dialogue on what the facts are, both on the criteria pollutants under the Clean Air Act and on CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. And I would hope, Congressman, that we do more of these special orders, that we even do some of these in Texas. And I can assure you, on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which I am a senior member, I have encouraged our current chairman, Mr. Upton, and our subcommittee chairman, Mr. Whitfield, and Mr. Stearns and Mr. Shimkus, to hold hearings, bring witnesses on both sides from Texas, bring our friends at the EPA, both up here and in Dallas, come up, and let's put the facts on the table, and then let's see what laws, if any, need to be changed. I am already a co-sponsor of a bill that would make it explicit that CO2 is not a regulated pollutant under the Clean Air Act and should not be. I'm not saying at some point in time we may not need to issue a standard on CO2 if it's proven that it is a harm to public health, but until that time it should not be regulated under the Clean Air Act. It was never intended to be, and we think the EPA is wrong to keep insisting that it should be. So again, I want to thank you, Judge, and thank you, Judge, for this special order. I'm glad to be here and participate.
You know, reclaiming my time, I thank you, Mr. Barton, for coming here and talking to this. Joe Barton really has been dedicating his life to these types of issues for his long